Okay. I'd like to welcome everyone to this week's edition of Imperial as One's Belonging series, where we explore the experiences of people from ethnic minorities and try to understand their journeys and their how they've got their sense of identity and belonging. And this week, to mark the women at Imperial and the fact that we had International Women's Day this week, we've got a special guest in Faith Osier. And Faith is, I don't even know how to begin to describe her. She's an inspiration, right? And I want to just say that she's an executive director of the Human Immunology Lab in IAVI, and she's also a professor here at Imperial College. And Faith, it is such a privilege to share this platform with you on to mark International Women's Week. And I'm going to start with the question which I always start with, to ask that question about how you gained your sense of belonging, your sense of identity as you were growing up.
Thanks, Wayne. It's a privilege to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here and share some thoughts that I hope will be helpful to others. So I got my sense of belonging really from my family. I grew up in Kenya. Mm-hmm. I was the second born in a family of 6 siblings. You know, my early childhood was very secure. My parents were switched on, if you like. Mm-hmm. They put me in good schools. I had all my vaccination. I was a healthy, happy child. We grew up living in staff quarters in a high school. So we had lots of space, lots of games to play. So I just had a very secure time as a young child, and I think that really helps to ground me in the early years. Yes.
So I remember when we had our discussion earlier in the week, you said that you were named Faith after your grandmother, wasn't it?
Yes.
And in growing up with your parents and your grandparents around, how did that make you feel, knowing that your name was after after one of your grandparents?
Yeah, you know, in fact, at the time, we just thought, we didn't think too much about it because it's the custom. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, you know, you're named after your grandparent on the mother's side, on the father's side, etc. So all my siblings were named after our grandparents, and then it goes back to the great grandparents. Right. So that wasn't, didn't think too much about it, to be honest. So my grandmother's name in our language, in our tribal language, translates to faith. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of automatic that I would be called that, given my position as the first daughter. Mm-hmm. And then my mother decided to call me Hope. Mm-hmm. After a good friend of hers who she made my godmother. Mm-hmm. And so then I ended up with these 2 names that people have ridiculed me over the years, Faith Hope. But that's what I ended up with. And I think that, you know, both of them carry they both are encouraging names or positive in that way. Yeah. And I remember my mother saying to me, you know, you're my faith and my hope. Yeah. So I think they were just good names that she chose, and it just worked out that way for me. Yeah.
That's excellent. I like that continuity, but also the fact that there was a meaning, and the fact that your mother used to call you, you're my faith and hope.
Yes.
Gave you that kind of like aspiration to do well. How was it for you in school, etc., when you were growing up? How was it academically? What did you enjoy?
Yeah, so in primary school, I remember that my older brother was the whiz in math. And so he's the one that helped the rest of us who are just normal human beings get through our math. But I also remember that my mother was a teacher. She was an English teacher.
Yeah.
So once she had us reading a lot, so we would be packed off to the National Library, and it was a good outing for us because we were little kids. We'd go on a bus by ourselves. We'd have a little money to buy a samosa at the end of the day, and then we were reading books the whole time. So that was a lot of fun. But as well, she paid for extra classes so that when if you were struggling with math or if you were struggling with a particular subject, because she was a teacher, she could access other teachers and get us the extra support. I think I also mentioned to you that because I was the second child, the parents were still very, very enthusiastic about bringing us up. And so, you had to do well in school. There wasn't a discussion about it, and they put all their energy into the first few children they had. When I compare how we had it compared to my youngest siblings, I mean, they were just on holiday. We were really, you had to know your tables, you had to know how to do everything. And there was just no sympathy. We were really, So that's, just the way it turned out.
Yeah. So being the first girl, it sounds as though your parents didn't distinguish between the fact that they had a son and a daughter, that their encouragement and their passion was equal for both of you. They wanted you to succeed to the same level.
Absolutely. And I think that made them, for their time, they stood out in that way, because lots of families would sacrifice girls if they were, for example, having a hard financial time, but they absolutely had none of that. We were treated equally and prioritized just like everybody else, which I think was really good of them.
So I love the fact that your parents encouraged you. Did they ever kind of like push you in any particular direction? I'm thinking of like where you've got to now. Was it them who were pushing you to say you should go into this or to go into that? Or where did that drive for and the passion that you've got for your subject area come from?
Yeah, so the thing was that my mother had a friend who was a doctor, who used to come and see her. This was a young lady who had been a student of my mother's in high school, because my mom was a teacher. And so when she finished high school, she maintained the friendship with my mother, and she had gone on to become a doctor. So every time she would come home to see us, my parents would say, "Oh, Hope, you should become a doctor like so and so." And I just didn't have any problem with that. I thought, oh yeah, I should become a doctor like so and so. And so it was fortunate for me that at an early age, I was exposed to a doctor. I didn't grow up thinking, oh, I'll be a teacher or I'll be a nurse or some other thing. I actually had a young, and this doctor was a woman as well. So I didn't have any kind of roadblock to think I can't do it. This lady was in our house every now and again, and I could see that she was a doctor. So that got into me early on. And as I went through school, by the time I got to A levels, I was enjoying biology quite a lot. And I was doing well in school, and most people who were like me applied for med school and ended up doing that.
So just out of curiosity, did you enjoy the medical studies which you undertook, and how did that influence to kind of like going into the kind of research which you're doing now?
Yeah, so med school was a bit of a shock, to be honest, because in high school, I was among the top kids most of the time. But in med school, the top kids from all the schools met. And then I found my position slipped down quite a lot. Because I was amongst everybody who was like, I just couldn't memorize things as well as all the others could. And so I had to quickly devise some other strategies to survive and still make the grades and, still hold my head up. So I found it challenging in that sense. But otherwise, I, like every young person, it was my first time away from home, away from the parents. So, I enjoyed my life as much as I could, but it was tough. When I finished and went out to work, it was something, again, another experience, because in med school, the final responsibility is not with you. Even if you see a patient, there'll be a doctor who'll come and pick up the pieces from where you left them. But once I went to do my house jobs, then the buck stopped with me in a way. There was another doctor you could call, but actually I really had to take responsibility. So that was a steep learning curve when you actually had to do that. But things changed. By the time I went to med school, I thought I'd be a surgeon.
Right.
That's what I enjoyed the most. But while I was doing my house jobs, there were tribal clashes in the country.
Right.
And I was in the surgical rotation at that time when we were receiving lots of patients who'd been cut up because people were cutting each other with, we call them pangas, but they're like gardening tools, big knives, let's say.
Yeah, machetes.
Machetes, yes, more like machetes.
Yeah.
And I just handled so much blood and death, because sometimes people would just pass on before you could really sort them out. That I turned away from surgery. My feet went cold. I just thought, I can't be doing this all the time. But then what I found that I did enjoy quite a lot was pediatrics, which was unlike me at the time, because I wasn't really a child-friendly kind of person. But that's what I enjoyed out of all the rotations that I did. And so I went on to train in pediatrics.
I'm not gonna ask if it was the fact that you had younger siblings which put you off being child friendly, but
no, I think it's just being young, and it's just being young and not wanting to have any responsibility, I think.
Yeah. So, because there's one thing about doing pediatrics, but now you've ended up in the role of kind of like doing immunology, infection, etc. How did you get that? How did you make that transition? What was it about pediatric medicine and then kind of like the lab-based medicine? How did that translate?
Yeah, so it was all happenstance, really. Where I did my training in Nairobi, so that's capital city of Kenya, and I wanted to get out of the city and go to the coast, to Mombasa, which was on the coast. And I was thinking, well, I'll be strolling on the beach after seeing my patients, etc. So I went to do my house jobs in Mombasa. It turned out there was no beach to stroll on, but that's another matter. Well, at the end of that, then you get posted to go and work anywhere in the country. And that's while I was in Mombasa, I heard about Kilifi, which is about an hour's drive north. It's another town where I heard that there was good training in pediatrics, and I had enjoyed pediatrics, and that there were people there, British scientists, doing malaria research. So I went over there and visited them, and they offered me a position after a while to work on the pediatric ward. And that's actually where I got my first real exposure to research. So we were working, regular pediatric ward, but then we would have a lot of malaria patients, and they were doing a lot of malaria research. So that's how I got exposed into it and got drawn to what they were doing, and carried on with that. Yeah, that's how I got in.
So all of that took place in Kenya, in Nairobi, and in various cities around the country. So what was it that made you make a transition from African continent over into Europe, and how did that come about? What was the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so I'm laughing because the reason will sound trivial, but I needed to get specialist training in pediatrics. And because although I was interested in research, there wasn't really a career path at that time for an African scientist to develop and become a researcher.
Right.
And so I wanted to secure my future by at least having some specialization in pediatrics, so that if a career in research went pear-shaped, I could still put food on the table by seeing patients. So I wanted to train in pediatrics. But having been exposed to the British scientists, it became apparent to me that I could also train in the UK. And this sounded much more appealing than returning to the University of Nairobi, because in fact, when I left, I thought I never want to come back here, because it was a bit rough in certain respects. And I just thought I want to go and get some more exposure and train in the UK. So then I came through a Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health scheme that was there at the time, that helps to place you in a hospital. I ended up in the Northwest in Arrow Park Hospital. And then I got my pediatric training in the UK.
You made mention there something which I thought was quite interesting, which was that there wasn't much opportunities to potentially develop a career, a research career as an African scientist, even though there was visitations from scientists from like the UK and Europe. There still wasn't opportunities opened up for African scientists working within the field. How did that translate?
So, I mean, that's a while ago.
Okay.
So I joined the place in 1998.
Right.
So at that time, there were no, so for example, I've had a lot of Wellcome Trust funding. There were no schemes for Africans. The funding for science was available to UK nationals or others, but certainly not for Africans. So you just couldn't see a route where you would get funding that would be sustainable. But over that time, 98 to, it's almost 25 years now or more. Things have changed. So I've seen the landscape change completely over that period. But certainly when I was starting out, it looked really bleak that you could progress.
Right. Okay. But you seized what opportunity that you could, in terms of the fact that you saw, I can work with my get my pediatric training, secure my future, so that if the research side doesn't, I've always got something.
I had something to fall back on.
Right. Okay. So you're now in the UK, you're doing your pediatrics rotations, etc. What was that transition like for you, coming from an African country into the UK? How did you experience that for yourself?
So there were some things I think by the time I was coming to the UK, I was already much more inclined towards research than towards clinical medicine.
Right.
And there were things that used to disturb me on the ward. So when you work in pediatrics, there's some children that come in and you treat them and they're out real quick, and they come in flat out one day and the next day they're laughing, and the next day they've gone home. And so that was always rewarding. But then there were also the children with chronic illnesses that that stayed on and stayed on and stayed on, and whatever you did, they never really quite recovered. So emotionally, that was really, I didn't like that. That was very, very uncomfortable. And when I came to the UK, I found it to be the same. That really there was a bunch of kids that come in with this and that, and they're fine. But then we had the kids, for example, the ones that really had an impact on me were children with cerebral palsy, children with long-term conditions, children who'd been born prematurely. and they'd never speak, never walk. And you look after them in the pediatric ward until they're, their age just doesn't allow them, or children with severe disabilities.
Yeah.
So again, I just found that very, very hard.
Yeah.
And it wasn't something that I wanted to deal with every day, almost like just wanting to run away from from that reality.
No, I understand.
Yeah. So even by the time I came to the UK, I was already switching off in a way from medicine and wanting to go into research. I make the joke that I just wanted to work with things in the lab. You can crush your culture, throw it in the bin, start another one the next day, no one's dying. But on the other side, someone could actually die. And that's a lot of pressure. So
So when did you make that decision? That decision then, that kind of like the pivotal decision to say, I'm going to focus more of my attention towards the, not academic, but the lab-based research as opposed to the clinical-based research?
So that was heavily influenced by the research group that I found in Kenya. In fact, at the time when I started thinking about it, I was considering public health, because public health would give me more of a 9-to-5 kind of lifestyle compared to being a doctor that had me up at all hours of the night doing, random things. Saving lives, not random things. But in fact, it was just the enthusiasm of the lab-based scientists that drew me into lab-based. When I was in med school, if you asked me anything I'd learned in immunology, I'd just give you a blank stare, because I could hardly remember anything. But now, faced with people who are actually studying immunity to malaria and trying to understand how that developed, I found that really, really interesting. So what I did was, when I came to do my training in the UK, I also registered for a master's in human immunity, just so that I could shore up the knowledge, because nothing had been retained from med school. So I just wanted to shore up that knowledge. And then what really enabled me to go on was funding. Because once I had my pediatrics training, I had my master's in immunology, and then I got funding from the Wellcome Trust. So by that time, Wellcome was giving fellowships to people from tropical and developing countries. And I got a fellowship which allowed me to do my PhD. So that really enabled me to make the switch. Otherwise, I would have had to still put bread on my table, and I'd have still been working in the hospital.
So that's part of that transition that you were mentioning earlier on, how you've seen the landscape change from when you originally were thinking about, maybe I could, the only option which was available to you was to go down the pediatric route. But now you can see that there's so many more opportunities which have been made available to you. What about the fact that you're kind of like, I'm going to go there, that you're a Black woman? Have you ever found there being any limitations on you because you're a Black woman in this particular field?
I wouldn't say that there are limitations. It's just lonely. It's just lonely, because you don't find, there are not many of us. And so it's the case that you feel like an imposter. I feel like an imposter many times, or I feel like I don't fit in, I don't fit the mold, just because there are not that many of us. So I found also, especially more recently, that, what you can turn what seems to be a disadvantage into an advantage. I mean, you just have to make the best of your situation anyway, right? And so what I think about more now is not on the downsides of being a Black woman, but what doors does being a Black woman open for me? And I think that today, in the environment that society is in, with the increasing awareness of inclusivity, then it's the time to be a Black woman, because everybody's thinking about it, everybody's discussing it, everybody's conscious about it. Business people are saying, if you don't have a diverse, your business will suffer. I mean, so now it's, so it's really the time. So I just think, rather than looking at a problem and feeling down about it, actually use it. And so I use my disadvantage, if you like.
It's an advantage. It's
I
a
think
superpower.
it's an advantage now. So you just make the best. But I think it's the principle really is that make the best of what you have, because oftentimes we are looking at what we don't have. If only I had X and Y, like so and so, if only I could, and I think it's human nature to do that. It's not unusual, but it makes us miss opportunities. I think one should just say, okay, what do I have in my hand? And with that, what can I do? And then you just go out and do it. Yeah.
So make the most of what you've got. Don't look on, this isn't what I have. I don't have this, so I can't do this. It's what do I have? What can I do?
Exactly.
Brilliant, brilliant. So I'm going to ask the question. In your current role, did you ever envisage that you would be in the current position that you're in terms of being like the executive director, a professor at Imperial College? Was that on your landscape at all when you were? No.
Imagine it just wasn't. It's crazy, but it really wasn't, because I grew up doing research in an institution that wasn't a university. And so even in that institution, there was no opportunity to become a professor. I mean, there wasn't. And the people that we were interacting with, who were professors from the UK, who were working in Kenya at that time, we understood from them that, being a professor is not, it's not for everybody, that it was difficult even for them in their country. So let alone for you in, and the question of tenure is always difficult. Everyone's trying to get tenure, and very few people actually end up getting tenure. So I just didn't focus on that at all. I kind of knew, like, okay, there's no tenure here. We lived from grant to grant. So that was a fact of how we lived. So I just didn't worry about it. In everywhere else I worked, I knew that I wasn't going to have tenure. So it wasn't something I was looking for. And what I had set my mind to do is to find a solution to the malaria problem that we have. And that's where I was setting my goals, rather than in being an executive director or in having tenure. And so when the opportunities came, I was pretty shocked. Shocked, but in a good way. Sense of shock, thinking, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here. Something I never thought that I could have.
Can I ask another question? I'm going to keep asking questions. Guys, if you've got any questions, either put them in the chat or raise your hands in a minute when I'm going to ask you to come in. But did you have any role models? Did you have anyone that you could look up to? I know you originally, when you were a little girl, you had the one, your mum's former student who had then gone on to become a doctor. But after that period where you were now a doctor, did you ever have anyone else who you could look up to or have as a role model that you could say, okay, let me see how I could become like that person?
Yeah, so I did have role models, but I wasn't thinking of them in that sense. But in essence, I was trying to copy people. So I think it is. I just didn't think about it like that. I was, once I decided to do research, I wanted to be as good as the best people around me that I could see.
Right.
And yeah, so I just tried to be like them. And so it started during my PhD, that my mentors were good, that they had the things that to me were marks of success.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
They
Yeah.
had multiple grants. They'd come and had welcome fellowships, so they knew what it took to have those welcome fellowships. They were generous with their time, which which also is important for me, because if they were not generous with their time, I wouldn't have learned. And I learned a lot just by watching them and listening to them, and sort of emulating how they worked, etc. So it was really just trying to be like the people around me, and they were all men. There wasn't a woman that I said, oh, I want to be like this. So it's not like I wanted to be like them, but I took traits in them that I liked. And that's what I tried to emulate. And it all boiled down to hard work. Because what they all did in common was that they were really good at what they did. They had really read every last paper on X and could argue every point on Y. And how they presented their case, how they made their argument, etc. So it wasn't really taking everything, but it was pulling out the things that I thought that I enjoyed about them, that I did.
So through observation, you saw common traits, keys to success.
Yes.
And you said, these are the strategies that I'm going to, thinking about what you said earlier on, these were the things which you were going to use to your benefit.
Yes.
You've seen a model, that's the way I was going, and it's been successful, I would say.
Yeah.
Was there, I'm going to ask, this is my final question before I open it up to the audience though. What would you say was the most pivotal moment for you along the journey which you've taken so far?
So the most pivotal moment came out of a period of hardship, really. When I was a postdoc, I was in Melbourne. I had a 1-year-old child, and I wanted to do great laboratory science as a single parent, with no family support. So I quickly found that, in fact, you can't go to the lab and start culturing parasites with a baby on your back. You've got to sort out childcare somehow. And childcare is expensive, and it runs from time A to time B. And so you have to finish everything that you want to do between time A and time B. And, lab life just doesn't work like that. And then looking after the child, I was constantly tired. The child was up in the night, I'm just finally settled down to do a bit of work, and the baby's up again. And then in the morning, you got to clean it, dress it, feed it, drop it off to school. By the time I get to my desk, I just want to lie down and sleep.
Get some rest.
And that really wore me down, and I wasn't having an easy time in the lab. I wasn't really being allowed to do what I had come to do. I ended up doing something else. And the combination of those things really had me on the brink of depression, really just thinking, okay, it's just not worth it. But I read a lot of self-help books, which people kind of laugh about, how to find your mojo and all this kind of thing. And they really helped me, because I decided that I wasn't gonna die. I wasn't gonna wallow in the mud, but I would spend whatever time I could thinking about what I would do in the future when I was out of the situation that I was in. So that's the time I began to write down what I really liked about research, why I felt I should continue, and what are the questions that I felt that I should answer, blah, blah, blah. Which was really helpful, because when I did leave Melbourne and was reunited with my husband and back to Kenya, I had already written down some good scientific ideas that when the grant calls came up, I was ready. And I got the funding and I moved on. So I think it was that points that made me realize why I'm in it. So I'm not just doing a job because this was the job that was available, but I'm doing this because I really want to do it. And here are the questions I really want to solve. And then over time, I became bolder about solving those problems, because in the end, you start off with a kind of shy statement that sort of says, yeah, I just want to understand this and that, because you don't want the embarrassment of failing.
Yeah.
But then I pushed myself to say, well, if where are you really going?
Yeah.
And if you're really going there, then really go there. There's no, there's no need to be shy about it. And so in more recent years, I've been bold enough to say that, look, I think we should make malaria history. And it's a pretty bold thing to say, but it's come over time.
Yeah.
I think if you're going to do something, then just do it, so.
I absolutely love that for multiple reasons, but there was, so I can see Sunday's not going to let me. He's already come on because he's saying it's my turn to take a question. I was just going to say, even though you said it was a difficult time, right? I like the way that you were actually able to identify your purpose. And it was from that time that your ideas were born, right? And so even though it was a difficult time, it was at that time that everything that you then set in motion was able to start. And I think that's absolutely, so I think sometimes, especially with students, I think people think, when I'm struggling, something is wrong. But when you're struggling is when you can become the most productive.
Exactly. That's when you discover your strengths.
Yeah.
That's when you discover your strengths. Yes.
Brilliant. All right, Sunday, I'm gonna pull you in, right? Because Sunday wants to ask his question. So Sunday, you ask your question,
no,
and then
no, you don't have to pull me in. I'm sure other people want to ask questions as well. Faith, this is fantastic. I mean, I'm so pleased since you've been talking. I've been smiling that yes, another Black woman at Imperial College coming to talk to us. Wonderful. The question I wanted to ask you, knowing the speed at which vaccination was developed for COVID, can we get the world? Can we get the Institute of Infection? Can we get Imperial College to do the same thing for all these kind of viruses that we have, African country, malaria, typhoid, all kind of things? Can everybody drop what they're doing for 6 months and come up with a solution? Or have you got something in your head that you want us to push and find a solution to all this?
Yeah, so my passion is malaria, really. I just think it's unacceptable that people are planning to go to the moon for holiday, and we can't prevent a child's life from being, ruined by malaria, or for people just losing their lives because of a mosquito transmitted infection, and COVID. It's not, as a scientist, that you can't really compare COVID with malaria, the biology, etc., are very different. But what COVID has shown is that with will and determination, you can achieve so much in such a short time. And I think that it's just a wake-up call. And if there's one thing that I would fight for, it's malaria, because there's 200 million clinical cases, 200 million cases every year in Africa, and 500,000 deaths. And we just say those numbers and just continue like, 200 million, and it's not okay. And so I think, that's what I'm going to try and do is galvanize us into action, because we can solve these problems. We need to come together and solve them. And without that drive, nothing happens. But with a drive, you can solve things. And there's no reason. I just can't accept that it's going to defeat us for another 100 years. I think we must solve it in our time.
Right? Thank you very much. If you think of anything we can do collectively, I'm an engineer and I do find solutions to things as well. If there's anything we can do to push this and drive this, let us know.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sunday, for that question. And Victoria, I see that there's a question from Victoria. Did you want to ask that question, Victoria?
Okay. Do you have any, you mentioned when you were in Australia that you read a lot of self-help books and that's what helped you to keep fighting and to keep going on. So do you have a particular or favorite self-help book you recommend or have read time and time again that you might suggest?
Yeah, so I'll tell you something funny about that. I've got a number of books that I wouldn't say any is my favorite, but different ones work at different times. Because, you know, the feelings that we have as human beings, they go up and down. You know, I could be feeling really confident and driven tomorrow, and then you just find me in tears somewhere the next day. And so what I've made it, or what I try to do is to read things that inspire me, and different ones hit the spot at different times. So whenever I'm traveling or somewhere, I'll end up buying a book. I mean, I can write to you separately about different books, but I think the principle is that it's not a one-stop fix. Like you'll read this one book and then now you're changed for the rest of your life. And so the joke I want to make is going to church. You know, if you go to church, you might ask yourself why you need to keep on going. And actually you find that it's the same guys that keep on going Sunday after Sunday. You think, surely haven't they learned already what there is to learn? But I think it's a similar principle, that it's a fire that you need to keep burning, logs that you need to keep adding into the fire every now and again, because life is rough. It takes you up and down. And so I have old books, but I still keep buying new ones. Sometimes I buy a new one and I don't actually get to read it, but at another time it will make a lot of sense. And then there's some bits of old books that you get a new insight from, or you just want to reread something. So I think the message really is to work it into a lifestyle, that you find things that inspire you, and it's a continuous journey. You're never completely fixed, if you like. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks.
Thanks, Victoria, for that question. Pei, I see that you've got a question that you'd like to ask Faith as well.
Thanks, Wayne. Hi, Faith. My question is, what advice would you give to leaders in academic research on how to support early career researchers from underrepresented groups who experience the same loneliness as you did during your career?
Yeah, so I think, what I've tried to do is to have a diverse group for starters. You know, once your research group is diverse, it's easier for people to feel like they belong, and then to set a healthy culture in the lab where it's like a family, and you look out for one another, because science is international. So you're not gonna always have people from your village with you in your lab. You know, you're gonna have a mix of people, but the common thread is people, and what we can do for each other is have compassion, have love, care for one another, so that the lab becomes more like a family. And I think that's what I try to do in my lab, and then to focus on what are we trying to achieve. We're not just growing parasites because we like to see how nice they look under the microscope. We're actually trying to get to so I get people to rally around the vision of why are we in the lab at midnight, changing media and doing this and that. It's really because of where we're going. So focus on the vision, but also have a really good, healthy culture in the lab, and then treat everybody the same, so that people know that whether they're underrepresented or not, they're gonna have your support. So I think that's the other thing that the leaders can do.
Thank you, Faith. That was a lovely answer, and thank you for sharing your story. Your professorship is an inspiration to a lot of women from underrepresented groups. So thank you.
Thank you.
Faith, thank you for that question, and Faith for the answer that you gave, because I agree that it's an international, we are working together, and we have to gain that sense of identity, sense of belonging, in order, many of the things which we're trying to solve, or many of the conditions which we're trying to solve, it's not something which is just restricted to one group of people, unless we make it restricted to one group of people, which is a slightly different kind of thought pattern. But Faith, I want to just say a really big thanks. And as Pei said, you are an inspiration to us all. You're the first Black female professor at Imperial College, and that is to be applauded. And we are so happy, and we are here to support you. There's a question which I'm going to just ask. Thinking back to when you were 16 or 18 going off to university, what advice would you have given your 16, 18-year-old self about how they would navigate life to get to where you are now?
Yeah, so when I reflect on my journey, I would tell my 16-year-old self, don't take no for an answer. Don't allow others to determine what your life will be based on their experience, because so many times people have told me, don't do this, you'll never make it at this, don't work with such and such people, they'll never support you, don't do, there's some things that if I had listened, I would just not be here.
Yeah.
So what I would say is listen to your inner voice, listen to your gut, and don't be put off by the ceilings that people put on you or try to define you, or say because you're underrepresented, you can only go so far. So if you listen to those things and accept them as truths, they become truths. So just don't accept them. I was told, don't work with these quote unquote white people. They'll never take you anywhere. But I worked with the white people, and I have got somewhere. I was told, don't spend time doing X and Y. It's bad for your career. I did X and Y, and look at where my career has ended up. So all the things that people try and confine you into something based on their experience, based on their understanding of the world, just don't accept that box. Decide what you want to do and work hard at it. I think if I leave you with nothing else, you've got to work hard at whatever it is that you decide to do, because nothing comes easy. And if you put your heart and soul into it, it opens the doors for you. So, decide what you want, work at it, and that thing that you've got will open the next door and the next door and the next door. And you'll be surprised at how far you go. So just don't accept any ceilings.
I love that. Fantastic. Don't accept the ceilings. Don't accept the naysayers. I agree 100%. Their experience isn't my experience. We can define our own selves. Faith,
yes.
It has been.
Yeah.
Go
I
ahead.
think just the last thing is that it's really you who determines you. It's you who determines what you will be. You're the designer of what your life is. If you say, well, I want to just cut trees, you'll cut trees. It's really up to you. So just when you realize that I don't know how to put it nicely, when you realize that it's up to you, it's not up to your mom, it's not up to your aunt, it's not up to your It's really you who's gonna walk the road, and that your experience is, whoever you are right now, it's unique. You know, I can't photocopy you into anybody else. Your experience is unique. But once you realize within your psyche that you've actually got the power to make yourself be what you want to be, it's you who sets it. It's you who decides it. I think that's, if you can get that sense, then really there is no limit, because you get what I mean? You're the one setting it. You're the one setting it. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you decide I could never be a professor, then that's it. You will never be a professor.
Yeah.
But I must say, I wasn't looking to be a professor. I was looking to solve a particular problem, because being a professor, you might say, so now what? You know.
Yeah.
So, you know, now just wait to retire, or, you know.
You're too young to retire.
What I was looking for was to solve a problem, and that's what I'm still looking for. Yeah. And this has come as a side product of me trying to solve that bigger problem.
And it's also your commitment to excellence. That's what I think it is. Based on those key skill sets which you had identified in those mentors which you saw along the pathway, if you copy that example and you work hard and you get the right ideas, then all is achievable. And I think you're a testament to that. Okay, Faith, it's been fantastic having you on as our special guest for International Women's Day, and you've represented in a superb way. So I just want to say a really, really big thank you. And as Sunday said, we're here to support you in whatever way we can. So, and that goes for all of us who are here, and all of Imperial as one. All right.
Thanks very
so
much.
much.
Thank you so
right.
much.
I'm going to just share what's happening next week. Because next week we have a young man, Avnash Shah, and he is a postgraduate student investigating properties of graphene in the Department of Materials at Imperial College. So please tune in, and we'll hear from Avnash about, although he's doing graphene, he is a bit of a poet as well. So come in, I'm sure we're going to have a real good time listening to Avnash next week. And if you have missed any of the interviews before, please go to our YouTube site, which it can be found at tinyurl.com/belonging-IAO. And you can hear other stories, other life experiences from the guests that we've had. But once again, I want to just say another big thank you to Faith and for everyone who's come today, and have a really good weekend, and we'll see you again next week. So thanks a lot. Bye-bye.